My name is Alex Thompson, and I moved to Birch Hollow 6 months ago to escape the noise of the city and focus on my writing. The town was quiet, almost too quiet, but I welcomed the peace. Every morning, I'd sit by the lake with a cup of coffee, tapping away at my latest article. Life was simple and predictable, until the day everything changed. It started on an ordinary morning. I was lost in thought when my phone buzzed with an alert. Lucas Marsh, a local I'd seen around but never spoken to, had walked into the police station and confessed to a murder that hadn't happened yet. My heart skipped a beat. A murder in Birch Hollow, and how does one confess to something that hasn't happened? My journalist instincts flared to life. I rushed to the police station where I found Detective Claire Turner, the town's tough-as-nails law enforcer. Claire was the kind of person who didn't have time for nonsense, her sharp eyes always scanning for the truth. When I asked about Lucas, she sighed. He described everything in detail, she said, but there's no body, no victim. Yet. That night, sleep eluded me. The air in my cabin felt thick, suffocating. Every creak, every rustle of leaves outside made my pulse quicken. It was as if the entire town was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. I felt eyes on me but saw nothing when I peered through the curtains. "You're being paranoid," I told myself, but the unease wouldn't fade. Determined to get to the bottom of this, I decided to visit Lucas's home the next morning. His house sat at the end of a gravel road surrounded by overgrown gardens. I spotted his wife, Hannah Marsh, kneeling among the weeds. She was pale, with dark circles under her eyes, as if sleep had been a stranger to her too. "Mrs. Marsh," I called out gently. She looked up, forcing a thin smile. "Yes." "I'm Alex Thompson, a writer. I heard about Lucas and I wanted to see if there's anything you could tell me." Her gaze shifted nervously. "Lucas has been different lately," she whispered. "Says things that don't make sense." "Like confessing to a future murder?" She bit her lip. "I don't believe him." There was fear in her eyes, a flicker of something she was desperately trying to hide. My stomach knotted as I left. Something was very wrong. Lucas had mentioned an abandoned barn in his confession. Curiosity gnawed at me, so I drove out there. The barn stood weathered and silent, its wooden planks creaking in the wind. As I walked around, a patch of freshly turned earth caught my eye. Kneeling down, I felt the soil, still moist. My heart pounded. This was the spot Lucas had described. I needed answers. Back at the police station, Claire allowed me to speak with Lucas. He sat calmly, his hands folded on the table. "You need to tell me what's going on," I urged. He met my gaze with unsettling serenity. "It's already happened," he said. "You just haven't realized it yet." "Who is the victim, Lucas?" He leaned in, whispering, "Hannah." I left the station, a cold dread settling over me. Could he be telling the truth? The following morning, the town was buzzing. Hannah Marsh had disappeared. Claire and her team searched tirelessly but found no trace of her. Whispers spread like wildfire. Had Lucas's eerie confession come true? I couldn't shake the feeling that the answer lay at the barn. Convincing Claire to meet me there, we arrived as dusk settled. Her usual confident demeanor was replaced with a pale unease. "Over here!" I pointed to the disturbed soil. The officers began to dig. Moments later, they uncovered Hannah, unconscious but alive, her body bruised and battered. Relief and horror washed over me. How had Lucas known? Lucas was arrested immediately. As they led him past us, he didn't struggle or protest. Instead, he wore a faint, unsettling smile. "It's not over," he murmured. That night, his words echoed in my mind. Sleep was impossible. I paced the cabin, the walls closing in around me. What did he mean? The next morning, a devastating call came. Hannah was dead. She had been stable, recovering in the hospital, and then her heart simply stopped. No explanation. Doctors were baffled. I rushed to the hospital, my thoughts a tangled mess. How could this happen? The chilling realization struck me. Lucas had predicted this, or worse, had orchestrated it. I confronted him once more. "What have you done?" I demanded. He gazed at me with those calm eyes. "I told you, it's already happened, you just couldn't see it." A shiver ran down my spine. This wasn't remorse or madness, it was certainty. Even Claire began to unravel. Late one night, over lukewarm coffee in her cluttered office, she confessed, "None of this feels right, Alex. Lucas, the town, it's like we're caught in a web we can't see." Seeing fear in someone as steadfast as Claire shook me to my core. If she was doubting reality, where did that leave the rest of us? A week after Hannah's death, my phone rang in the dead of night. Static crackled on the line before a familiar voice whispered, "It's not over." "Lucas," I stammered, "but how? He was in custody." I slammed the phone down, my hands trembling. Sleep was out of the question. Was I losing my mind? The next morning, strange symbols were etched into my front door. Symbols I'd seen carved into the barn's wooden beams. My blood ran cold. Was this a threat? A warning? I didn't know where to turn. The town was spiraling. Neighbors eyed each other with suspicion. Rumors of secrets and betrayals spread. People were on edge, arguments erupting over nothing. It was as if a dark cloud had descended, smothering us all. One night, footsteps crunched outside my cabin. Heart pounding, I grabbed a flashlight and edged the door open. "Who's there?" I called into the darkness. Silence. Then, just beyond the trees, a whisper. "You're next." I retreated inside, bolting the door. Fear tightened its grip on me. How was Lucas reaching me from behind bars? The following day, Claire snapped. She burst into the station demanding Lucas's release. "He's not the one," she cried. "Can't you see? It's this place. It's cursed." They restrained her, confusion and concern etched on their faces. Watching her break shook me deeply. The strongest person I knew was crumbling. An unsigned letter awaited me at home, the handwriting unmistakably Lucas's. The town was built on ancient grounds, it read. Something dark sleeps beneath Birch Hollow. It's waking up. You need to leave, Alex, but maybe it's already too late. I felt trapped. People were disappearing. First a reclusive couple, then a teenage girl, then more, vanishing without a trace. The police were helpless. The town was devouring its own. Desperation drove me back to the barn. The air was thick, heavy with an unseen force. Shadows danced along the walls as my flashlight flickered. Then I saw him, Lucas, standing calmly. "Why are you here?" I demanded, my voice barely steady. He smiled faintly. "You finally arrived." "Enough of the riddles," I shouted. "What do you want from me?" He pointed to the ground. There, etched into the dirt, was my name. My legs weakened. "What is this?" I whispered. "It's already happened," he said softly. "You've been part of this from the beginning." The realization hit me like a tidal wave. Every step I'd taken, every question I'd asked, it had all led me here. I wasn't just a bystander. I was entwined in whatever darkness gripped Birch Hollow. "You can't fight it," Lucas continued. "None of us can." Panic surged through me. I turned and fled the barn, the walls seeming to close in. Outside, the sky was unnaturally dark, stars obscured by swirling clouds. Back at my cabin, I tried to pack a bag, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I needed to leave, to escape this nightmare. But deep down, I knew it was too late. As dawn broke, I felt a strange calm wash over me. Maybe Lucas was right. Maybe this was inevitable. They found my cabin empty, my car still in the driveway. Just another disappearance in Birch Hollow's growing list. I don't know where I am now, It's dark and time feels distorted, but I can still hear Lucas's voice, a whisper in the void. Welcome home. Story 2. My name is James Carter, a detective in the city's homicide unit for the past decade. I've chased criminals, solved impossible cases, and stared evil in the face. But nothing prepared me for the nightmare that became known as the locksmith. I got the call from Captain Reed just as dawn was breaking. His voice was grave. "James, we've got another one. You need to see this." I arrived at the crime scene to find a familiar face staring lifelessly back at me. Lisa Thompson, a woman I knew from college, someone I'd lost touch with years ago. She lay there, a key placed neatly on her chest. My stomach twisted. This was the locksmith's signature. He was back, and now he was targeting people from my past. Back at home, I couldn't shake the unease. Sarah Mitchell, my girlfriend of 2 years, watched me with worried eyes. She was a freelance journalist, sharp and intuitive. "You seem distant," she said softly. "I'm fine," I lied. But the fear was creeping in, and she could sense it. There was something else in her gaze, a hint of distance I couldn't place. Late nights at the precinct became my norm. One evening, as I sifted through files, I heard footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. I glanced up, expecting to see another detective, but the corridor was empty. It wasn't the first time. Doors would creak open, papers would vanish from my desk, an unsettling feeling settled in my gut. That night Sarah called, her voice trembling. "James, please come over. Something's wrong." I rushed to her apartment to find the front door forced open. Inside, everything was untouched, but a chill hung in the air. "Nothing's missing," she whispered, "but I feel like someone was here, leaving a message." My partner, Daniel Williams, had been my confidant since we joined the force together. Lately, he'd been distant, shadows under his eyes. "You okay, Dan?" I asked over coffee. "Just tired," he mumbled. "This case is getting to me." I wanted to believe him, but something was off. That night I got a call. Daniel had been attacked at his home. He survived, but his memory of the event was blank. At the hospital, I noticed a key placed on his windowsill. The locksmith was taunting us. One morning, I woke to find Sarah staring at an old photo of us. "What's on your mind?" I asked. She sighed. "Just thinking about how things used to be." "Everything okay?" She nodded, but avoided my eyes. Later, while looking for a pen at her desk, I found a hidden file. An old case connected to the locksmith, one I didn't recognize. She'd been investigating behind my back. The phone calls started soon after. Every night at 3 a.m. my phone would ring, heavy breathing, then silence. I tried tracing the calls, but they led nowhere. Sarah suggested we change our numbers. We did, but the calls continued. Whoever it was knew too much about us. Captain Reed called me into his office. "We got an anonymous tip. There's a threat against your life. Maybe it's time to step back." "I can't," I insisted. As I left, I found a note on my car. "Stop digging or someone else dies." The locksmith was daring me. We finally had a suspect, Michael Harris, a locksmith who worked near the latest crime scene. During interrogation, he leaned forward, a chilling smile on his face. "You'll never catch him," he whispered. "He's been watching you for years." A shiver ran down my spine. "Who? What do you know?" But he fell silent, leaving me with more questions. Desperate, I set a trap. We staged a crime scene, hoping to lure the locksmith out. Hours passed in silence. Just as we were packing up, I saw a shadow in the distance. I gave chase, but he vanished into the night. At home, Sarah's eyes were filled with tears. "I need to tell you something," she said. "What is it?" "I've been investigating the locksmith on my own," she confessed. I thought I could help without putting you in danger." "Why didn't you tell me?" I demanded. "I was scared," she admitted. "I didn't want you to get hurt." Another body turned up. Megan Lewis, a journalist who had covered many of my cases. She'd been working on an expose about corruption within the force. At the scene, a familiar key was found. The locksmith was escalating, and it felt personal. One night, I spotted a figure across the street from my apartment, watching me. Our eyes met before he darted away. I chased him through dark alleys, my heart pounding. But he slipped away, leaving me alone in the shadows. Daniel recovered physically, but his spirit seemed broken. "Do you remember anything about the attack?" I asked. He hesitated. "Just a figure standing over me. I couldn't see his face, but it felt like someone we know." "Who?" "I don't know," he sighed. "It's all a blur." Taking the night shift at the station, I hoped to find clarity. Instead, whispers filled the empty halls. My name carried on a cold breeze. I searched every corner but found nothing. My nerves were frayed. The locksmith was playing with me. Digging through old case files, a name kept appearing: Matthew Cole, a former detective who'd been dismissed years ago under suspicious circumstances. He had been present, silently lurking in the background of my life. I confronted Sarah. "What do you know about Matthew Cole?" Her eyes filled with tears. "I didn't want you to find out like this." "Tell me everything," I demanded. She took a shaky breath. "Matthew approached me months ago. He threatened to kill you if I didn't help him. I thought I could outsmart him, but he's always one step ahead." That night, I followed her as she slipped out of the apartment. She met with a man in a deserted alley. Matthew Cole. Tall, with piercing eyes that seemed to glow under the dim streetlights. My heart pounded. Sarah was colluding with him. I stepped into the alley, gun drawn. "Sarah, get away from him." Matthew smirked. "Detective Carter, always chasing shadows." "Your game's over," I spat. He laughed softly. "This is no game. This is justice." "James, I can explain," Sarah pleaded. "Save it," I snapped. "Both of you, hands where I can see them." But in a swift move, Matthew disappeared into the darkness. Sarah stood there, tears streaming down her face. Back at the apartment, the truth spilled out. "He said he'd kill you," she sobbed. "I thought I could find a way to stop him." "You should have trusted me," I said, pain and anger twisting inside me. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. We devised a plan to trap Matthew, an abandoned warehouse where he was known to operate. I called in every favor, setting up a perimeter. This had to end. Inside the warehouse, Matthew stood alone under a flickering light. "I've been expecting you," he said calmly. "It's over, Matthew." He tilted his head. "Is it?" Suddenly, the lights went out. A gunshot echoed in the darkness, followed by a scream. Sarah's scream. "Sarah!" I shouted, panic gripping me. When the lights flickered back on, she lay on the ground, blood staining her shirt. Matthew was gone. I rushed to her side, cradling her in my arms. "Stay with me, please," I begged. Her eyes met mine. "I'm sorry for everything," she whispered before her eyes closed. Grief and rage consumed me. Matthew had taken everything. I vowed then and there to bring him down, no matter the cost. Weeks turned into months as I hunted Matthew, but he had vanished without a trace. The department moved on, but I couldn't. Every lead led to a dead end. Every clue, a reminder of those I'd lost. Captain Reed tried to pull me off the case. "You're too close to this, James." "He's still out there," I insisted. "I won't stop until he's caught." "Don't let this destroy you," he warned. But it was too late. The locksmith had already taken everything I held dear. Now all I had left was the hunt. They say time heals all wounds, but some scars run too deep. Every night I replayed the moments, the missed chances, the lost lives. Matthew Cole was still out there, a ghost in the shadows, and I was left chasing whispers, haunted by the keys left behind. But I wouldn't give up. I couldn't, because this wasn't just about justice anymore. It was personal, and I was willing to risk everything to end the locksmith's game.